Kaya, Wanju, hello and welcome to everyone joining us today for Perth NRM's Coastal Birdwatching Workshop. As many of you might know, my name is Hannah and I have loved the coast for as long as I can remember. I've been lucky enough that this passion has led me to be involved in supporting our stunning Perth coastline, the coastal managers and the invaluable volunteers to help protect, restore, and really give a voice to the coast. I am lucky to do this as a coastal and marine manager with Perth Natural Resource Management, or NRM. This webinar is part of Perth NRM's Coastal Capacity Building Program and is gratefully funded through a Coast West grant from Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. Today, I'm coming to you from our Perth office and I'm sitting on Wajak Noongar land. Nala Kadich, Wajak, Mort, Kayan Kadak, Nija Buja. I and the team at Perth NRM acknowledge Wajak Noongar people and ancestors as the traditional custodians of this land, which was never ceded. We value their connection and commitment to land, waters, and community. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from wherever you may be listening from today, and pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. The rains are definitely here, and it is the season of Makaroo, the coldest and wettest time of the year. So starting to turn our attention towards bird life, this is a time for many species to be pairing up in preparation for the breeding season. If you look carefully, you might now see pairs of wadongs or ravens flying together, and our friends in the southwest will start to see a large influx of black swans or marley as they prepare to nest and breed. So let's jump into it after that little taster. A little housekeeping to start. With so many of you joining us today, we have muted your microphone and turned off your video. But this does not mean that you can't interact. So we'll take a moment. If you wiggle your mouse and you'll see some icons appear at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A icon, which if you click, a box will appear on the screen and you can type your questions in there at any point during the workshop. You'll also be able to see other people's questions in that. So if have a quick check first, and if someone has already asked the question that you're interested in, just give it a thumbs up, a click on the thumbs up, which will bump it up to the top, and it means that we'll get to answer the most important questions in case we start to run out of time. I will come back to these questions after the presentation, and I will read them out for our presenter Tegan to answer. So you'll be hearing from Tegan Douglas, who is WA's Citizen Science Project Coordinator at BirdLife Australia. A critical component of why we protect and restore our coastline is for habitat value and increasing biodiversity. And looking at that biodiversity and measuring can help us measure success of a project and the health of an ecosystem. That can be looking at insects, reptiles, mammals, and of course, bird life. So Tegan will speak to bird surveys, why they're so important in advocating for the protection of sites and bird species across Australia. And she will explain how coastal communities like ours can harness their passion for wildlife and help collect valuable data on birds using the Birdata app. So first, we'll play a video. And then we'll jump straight into our presentation from Tegan. So I will start the video now.
Hi, I'm Tegan Douglas. I'm the WA Citizen Science Project Coordinator at BirdLife Australia. I'm here to talk to you today about doing bird surveys in our coastal reserves. Before we head off, we should run through the kind of stuff that we're going to need to take with us. So even though we're going near the beach, we need to think about long sleeve shirt and pants, closed-in shoes, a hat, we need to take binoculars, and we can capture all the information that we're going to be collecting on our smartphone. So that's pretty much it. Don't forget to lock your car, and we're good to go. with doing most bird survey work, it's best to do it in the early morning. That's when the birds are calling more and when the wind is the lowest. That's really important in our coastal habitats because the wind can really play havoc with our ability to hear the birds calling. The other thing to keep in mind is that we know our coastal habitats are really fragile, so it's really important to stay on the paths as much as possible. Birds are really important environmental indicators and they can be found in every ecosystem in the country. With BirdLife Australia's Birdata app, you can record your bird observations on the go. The Birdata app has a few built-in fail-safes to help you along the way. It can provide you with a list of the most common species seen in your area, and it also error check if you see something that seems a little bit unusual. That means that anyone across the country with the Birdata app can become a citizen scientist and can help protect birds. Singing honey eater.
I love that sign off. All right, over to you, Tegan.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that, Hannah. So that's right. I'm here to talk about doing citizen science in our coastal reserves and talking about some of the reasons why that's a really worthwhile and valuable thing to do. So yeah, I work for BirdLife Australia, as Hannah said. I'm our citizen science project coordinator, and for me, that's an absolutely fabulous job. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with BirdLife Australia, we're Australia's oldest conservation organisation. We're the only one that focus solely on conservation of our native birds and their habitats. So we've been around since 1901, and one of the wonderful reasons why we've been able to do that is because people have always had a fascination with birds. We have just this amazing ability to connect with birds. We see them sing, we see them build families, we see them in our everyday lives, we see them in unusual situations, unusual locations around the world, and also in very familiar ones. So because of that familiarity, we've been able to build a whole wealth of knowledge around birds and get everyday people who might do all sorts of things in their regular life, but get them enthused about birds and bird knowledge and maybe conserving the habitats that those birds live in. So BirdLife is a recreational birding group, as well as encouraging all these bird skills and this citizen science. And because birds don't know where the borders to countries are, some of our birds fly from here to the Arctic Circle every year and back. So we have lots of international connections as well. In their movements across the country and around the world, birds can tell us about the environment. So birds live in all those sorts of habitats. Some of them can survive in really highly urbanized areas and learn to build nests on skyscrapers. Some prefer pristine, untouched forests. Regardless of the habitat that they live in, our birds have different jobs in these habitats. Some that we're familiar with, particularly in coastal environments, involve things like eating and so dispersing seeds. They pollinate flowers. They might eat insects or other animals and keep populations of in the fauna community in balance. Maybe they form part of nature's cleanup crew and sort of keep and eat scraps or scavenge on things. But regardless of what they do, if we go to a particular location and look for the birds that are there, every single bird that we see in that spot will tell us a little bit about that patch, about that habitat at that point in time. So if we were to visit there again and like repeatedly over months or even years, we can use the presence of the birds that we see there and how those change to tell us about what the environment's up to. And because bird watching is such a popular hobby and everyday people can go out and enjoy birds and see them in the places that they like to visit, we can harness that bird watching power to become power for citizen science and for conservation, which I think is a really magic thing. So some of the reasons why we can do this, so you take things like this white-winged fairy-wren. Birds are quite easy to see, and I can sense a few people will be looking through this and going, "Oh, Tegan, I'm reading these dot points and I'm not hearing it." But comparatively, birds are really easy to see. They're active during the day. You can see them as they fly around, unlike things like mammals that might be nocturnal, or animals that you have to set traps for to catch, or that live underground. Birds are really easy to hear as well. They call lots. They're really vocal, just like humans are. And so we can learn to even identify them by call without even seeing them. And in some instances, identify particular individuals just on their call alone. Because of this wealth of knowledge, because people have been watching birds for so long, birds are really easy to identify. And I can hear people again, I can hear those eyes rolling. But trust me, compared to species that you might have to hold in your hand, like if you take some of the reptiles, for example, that you have to count the numbers of scales in particular places, or some mammals that you can't tell apart by looking at them side by side, you'd have to take a genetic sample to tell them apart. Birds are really easy to identify. And so because of all these things, everyday people can collect information about them and collect it in a repeatable way. So the observations that I make will be really similar to the observations that you make if we visit the same patch and look at the same birds. And then by protecting these really visible birds, we can help protect the habitat that they live in, and hence protect the diversity, the other plants and animals that are using that same space that are less easy to monitor. So when it comes to coastal bushland reserves, they're a really important part of our city. So I'm sure that you guys know, Hannah definitely knows how valuable and important our coastal areas are. They have an amazing biodiversity all of their own. And yet they're really fragile. They're a really important coastlines are really important, and the vegetation that's there, it helps minimize erosion, it stabilizes sand dunes, it does all sorts of, and by doing that, it helps protect things on the land and in the water as well. It protects seagrass beds and all sorts of things. And the coastal vegetation that we have in Perth, some of it might be remnant, but I'm sure there's a lot of you that have been involved with friends groups and taking like very active steps to restore or just maintain the quality of some of those patches. In the Perth region, our coastal reserves are really important wildlife corridors as well. So if you consider this map of this satellite imagery of Perth, you can see the brown of the suburbs where natural vegetation has been removed, and housing and things that are generally unfriendly to wildlife have been put in. But when you consider where our coastal reserves are, they form, even if you have to zoom in a lot to see them. So if you look here, just north of Hillary's, you can see this really long green stretch of coastal habitat. And those really long stretches form corridors that allow animals to move with the direction of our coastline, allow a lot of like north-south movement of fauna, and they can use those north-south corridors like leaves and like branches and leaves. They can use the branches, our corridors, to move to get to the leaves, the different reserves that are scattered throughout the suburbs. And coastal areas are popular with people. There's a reason a lot of us like to live in Perth, and some of that's to enjoy the beautiful coastline and all the amenities that it has to offer. So that means that unfortunately there can be a lot of pressure on these spaces by people wanting to be there and animals wanting to be there as well. So they're really important to protect. So let's meet our coastal birds. I'm sure when I say coastal birds, this might be customer number one that you think of, the delightful chip thieving silver gull. But our coastal reserves are, yes, I'm not going to lie, they are very important for silver gulls, but they form lots of different sort of habitat types. Birds hang out in lots of spaces. So yes, they hang out on the beaches, and yes, they hang out on the rocky outcrops and the cliffs and the reefs, and the artificial replacements that people have put in, the jetties and the groins and the marinas. But when we look at doing coastal surveys, usually what we're talking about is the more vegetated areas, those coastal shrublands, those dunes that have been held in place by all that wonderful vegetation. When you head slightly further inland, those taller melaleuca and eucalypt stands that you get. But we like to still include beaches and rocky outcrops, because some of the birds that spend most of their time there will still make use of that vegetation. So silver gulls will nest in that coastal vegetation. During bad weather, things like pied oyster catchers and red-cap plovers will go up to them to hide and seek shelter. on a lot of our offshore islands, that coastal vegetation is important seabird nesting habitat. So before I get into it, I was going to do a little bit of a run through about some of our birds, but I do have a poll just to know how quickly I should go through this or not. Just take a minute to tell me how much you know about your birds, so I know what to spend time in and what not to. I'll just give you like a minute or so. Let's have a look. All right, that gives me a sense. No bird whisperers. Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I'm always pleased to hear the people that say that they're fledgling birders, because us birders like to use puns, that they're just on the start of their birding journey. Excellent. I want to say to you that doing bird surveys might sound a little bit daunting, particularly if you don't feel like you know all your birds, but make no mistake, some of the birds that do really well in our coastal reserves, the birds that you'll run into the most, are also the birds that you tend to run into around home and in your local park as you visit school or stop at the shops. Things like ravens and magpies do really well in coastal reserves. Willy wagtails will be there chattering away. Singing honeyeaters, like you might have heard in the video, in almost every one of our coastal reserves. Plus we get things like galahs and crested pigeons and birds that you might see every once in a while. Things like black-faced cuckoo shrike are always there. But there's some reasons why coastal reserves are really important for our birds. And one of those is that our coastal vegetation contains a lot of seed-bearing plants. So I mentioned on the previous slide, the crested pigeon, the galah and the singing honeyeater, all of those eat seed and fruit. So if you picture yourself standing in your local coastal reserve and look at the vegetation that's around you, you have that spinifex and the scaevola and the rhagodia and all those acacia species. You have all those sharp sedges. All of those provide heaps of seed for birds, heaps of seed and fruit, and so we get all these seed-eating species. So some of the doves that aren't native, but then we get it's one of the few places in our city that we get some of our quail species. So brown and painted button quail love our coastal reserves. And we're even fortunate enough in some places in Rottnest and not so much in the middle of the city, but on the extremities, we occasionally get rock parrots in amongst our coastal reserve as well. But the reason probably I like coastal reserves the most is because that's where we get all our delightful little shrubland species. So our coastal reserve has lots of shrub, and the shrub, that dense low vegetation is perfect for these guys. So we have species like white-browed scrub wren and inland thornbill, and these are all species that they're not really capable of strong flight. They can't cross big open spaces. So these long narrow corridors are some of their strongholds in the Perth city. One of the things that we're really lucky to get is we're lucky to get 3 species of fairy-wren in our coastal reserves. So we get 5 in the Swan Coastal Plain. We have 2 that you tend to get more up in the hills, but these 3 you get all in our coastal reserve. So I've got pictures here. The males are all at the bottom and the females are all at the top. So we have splendid fairy-wrens that you tend to get more in south of the river, the purple-backed or variegated fairy-wrens that you tend to get in the north, and then white-winged that you tend to get in the north a little bit as well. If you want a sense of how important our coastal reserves are for these birds, have a quick sticky at this map. So this is records that I've pulled from observations of white-winged fairy-wrens. So these little guys pictured on the left here. And the observations are all colour stamped. So the closer to a dark blue it is, the more recent the sighting. And so you can see that there's all along our coastline, there's this lovely speckling of white-winged fairy-wren sightings. Unfortunately, when you look a little bit further inland, so if you look around some of those inland northern lakes around Jandabup and Nangara, places like that, the sightings are all quite old. They're all yellow and red sightings. We don't record white-winged fairy-wrens there anymore. And down in the bottom right-hand side, you can see through some of our southern lake system, there's a sighting that's from about 2005. if you consider before this city had spread out so far, we would have had white-winged fairy-wrens not just up and down the coast, but in anywhere that has that quite low vegetation. So all of those, all of that sort of damp land and heath that you get through through Southern River and Jandakot kind of way, you would have had white-winged fairy-wrens all through that, all around those northern lakes where those old sightings are, all of anywhere where it gets slightly saline as well. They love all of that. So unfortunately, our coastal, at the moment, our coastal reserves seem to be the main place that we get those fairy wrens still. So it's important to protect them and keep them there. So I'm going to be talking, for the rest of the talk is going to be focusing on bird surveys. So here's, so for those of you who just have a few questions about why we should go out and record birds, I just wanted to give a bit of a primer about bird surveys. So in the simplest sense, it's visiting a particular area and making note of the birds that you see. But a bird survey is not just a list. A bird survey is a record of the effort from that one particular visit, because usually it's not possible to count all the birds in an area. So if you look at this picture here, this is from lovely coastal vegetation on Rottnest. Off in the background, you can see a beach. Beaches are one of the few places, like those really open places, beaches and sometimes lakes, are places where you might be able to get close to counting all the birds that are in the area. But in anywhere with vegetation, particularly like our coastal reserves, there's going to be a chance that you're going to miss birds. They might be not calling, so you don't hear them. They might be hidden in the shrubbery and don't fly across the path, so you don't see them. Or they might just happen to be in a neighbouring area outside of your survey area. So instead, the way that we approach surveys is that you go to an area and you contribute a fixed effort. You come out with, at the end of the day, you go to the patch and you survey. You survey an area for a particular time, so 20 minutes or half an hour is a quite popular time length, or you say, I'm going to walk through this patch, all of this patch just here, so you limit it by area instead. So you're not looking at gathering the data on all the birds within a single day, but you use repeated visits to give you the complete picture. So you might have birds in coastal reserves that are only seasonal visitors. Things like fantail cuckoos are definitely only seasonal visitors to coastal reserves. They're true cuckoos and they lay their eggs in the nests of white-browed scrub wrens and some of those lovely fairy wren species, but they don't hang around when those birds aren't breeding, so they're only spring and summer visitors. So if you only had a list generated for that site from a visit to that area in winter, you wouldn't have a record of those species having been there. One of the other positives to doing repeated surveys is that it can show differences in the community over time. So if you go from recording fairy wrens every time you visit a site to only recording them half the time you visit a site, and then only 1 in 10 times you go there, you can make it's quite a reasonable assumption to make that those birds are disappearing from that area. And hopefully before it gets to 10%, but as you start to see them disappear, you can start an investigation into why that's happening. So when it comes to coastal reserves, they do provide us with some interesting challenges. So like was mentioned in the video, wind can play a really big part in our ability to hear the birds that are there. As with most bird surveys done in the morning are best. They're calling more at that time of day, but also for coastal habitat, the wind tends to be less first thing in the morning. Sometimes in the late afternoon as well, but morning's usually the best bet. Sometimes when you're planning where you walk for your survey, you can pick a path that takes you through like the lee of the dunes rather than spending lots of time on those really exposed to those spots that are really exposed to the wind. So it can take a little bit of planning to get to figure out how to get the most out of your coastal reserve surveys. So the other thing to keep in mind is that it was mentioned in the video as well is staying on the path. As I mentioned, our coastal habitats are fragile, but also the vegetation, as you can see in that top picture, in some of our well-established coastal reserves is really thick. There's a lot of sword sedge and all sorts of sharp things that you don't really want to be pushing your way through. And as I'm sure most of us are aware, particularly in summer, our coastal habitat can be a little bit snaky. So it's sometimes best to stay on the path where we can see those hazards rather than pushing through. One of the other things to keep in mind is that because a lot of us spend quite a bit of time protecting those coastal reserves, participating in revegetation projects or looking at fences and things like that, the image that's given off because these are really like well-used spaces, when there's a sign that says dune revegetation, keep off, and somebody walks down the beach and they see you stomping through the middle of that re-veg, they get the impression that people don't care about it. And it's not just if you can be wearing high vis that says Birdwatcher or important survey work going on here or whatever. But even after you're gone, if those footprints are still there, people can still see that there have been people trekking through that habitat. So it's best to plan your surveys so that you can stay on the path. Also, you're heading down to the beach. You've got I assume you're taking binoculars with you to places where people are wearing their bathers and have their kids. Be really community minded how that looks. Most people are really friendly when you go to the beach and they see that you're sort of looking off into the vegetation and things, but just do be aware of how your appearance might look from a distance. Is definitely a way to make your bird surveys go better. So when it comes to choosing how bird survey is going to look, the patch that you are working on has a big impact on that. So there's two main survey formats that Birdata use that are appropriate for coastal bird surveys. One is a 2 hectare 20-minute search. The other one is a 500 metre area search. You can combine them both. So a 500 metre area search is you're basically recording anything within a 500 metre radius of a point. So you can picture it like a cricket oval. The 2 hectare area is the wicket, and then the 500 metre area search is the birds that you encounter in the rest of the oval. But it's well worth road testing a few options, like I mentioned, to see what the wind's like, to look at how long those paths are, and then you have to decide on on a frequency that's going to suit you. You might go to the beach every day, but doing a survey every day might become a bit onerous, and we'd much prefer that you're able to collect a long-term data set rather than just a short blast. So consider maybe just doing surveys weekly or monthly or seasonally instead. So a little example of this, this is actually the same screenshot the same little inset that I showed before. It's just a little patch of bushland north of Hillary's. So this is the bottom of the screen is the car park for the dog beach at Hillary's. If we're to look at how big a 2 hectare area is in this patch, it's an area about this size. Obviously, there's no paths through a lot of that area, so it would be really difficult to do a 2 hectare area search there. However, we can make use of the features that are already in place. So there's lots of walking tracks there, so we could instead look at covering our 2 hectare area instead. So 2 hectares is 100 metres by 200 metres. Instead of looking at it in that short rectangle, we could look at it as a long rectangle instead. So you could look at a length of 400 metres and survey the birds on 25 metres on either side of the path you follow. So it would look, the area that you'd cover would look a little bit like that, but is actually the same size as your 2 hectare area. All right, so I just wanted to round out the talk talking about Birdata and giving a little run about how that works. But first, I wanted to get a sense of who has had a chance to use it before. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute, and we do have a poll on just asking how familiar you are with Birdata. So I'll just stop sharing and I'll just get you to have a quick look at that. and just select one of the options, and I'll pitch my content appropriately. Excellent. All right, so I've got a couple of yeses. So you guys bear with me. If you've got any questions, then pop them in the Q&A and we'll come to them at the end. For everybody else, let's just give a quick run through. So Birdata, it's an app and a side-by-side web portal that allow you to collect data, that allow you to collect information on the go. It's really neat because it's interactive. Everybody's information gets pulled in together, so you can use it not just to store your own information, but to sort of source the crowd. You can look at what other people have seen in places. It will let you learn about it, so you can use it to learn about a particular species, where they're found and where they're not, what you expect to see when you visit somewhere, and can also help you find and join existing survey projects. So in general, apps can be really good for citizen science for a number of reasons. When we used to do surveys, we'd be doing things like carrying a whole heap of equipment with us. We'd have a GPS and a clipboard and pens, and you'd need a watch and all sorts of things, as well as your binoculars. Because our smartphones can do all of that, we don't have to worry about leaving our pen behind in the sand, or our clipboard, our notebooks blowing away in the wind, or any of that sort of stuff. It's portable data recording, and it does everything absolutely fantastically. So we can submit data straight away. There's no needing to remember to send in survey sheets. There's some really neat functions that allow us to error check the data straight away. So while you're out there looking at a bird and you think you know what it is and you put it in, if it comes up as something unusual, you've got the opportunity while the bird's right there in front of you to take a second look and either tweak your answer or provide extra information to say why it is what you think it is. So the way to get involved with Birdata is you need to sign up and set yourself up some login details. I would recommend going to the website, so birdata.birdlife.org.au. This is what the web page currently looks like. It's going to be changing very, very soon, but there, regardless of how the imagery changes, there is going to be a big button that says sign up. Here it's in the top right hand corner. You can just click it, you just fill in some details, set yourself a username and a password, and then you can use that to upload and look at all your information. So I'm going to give a quick run through of how the app works by screen sharing and showing you. And this is my backup here in case it doesn't. So I'll just share my phone screen. All right. So that should be sharing just my phone screen with you. So we're out and about. I'm going to do a bird survey. I've got the Birdata app on my home page, and I can just click it with my finger and open the app. The first time I open it, I'll need to put in my login details, same as you would with any of the other apps, just like any of the other apps. After that point, it remembers who you are. So it just goes straight to this page. It shows you the stats from some of your previous surveys that you've done. But we're not here to muck around. We're just here to do a bird survey. So we click the record survey button. And it will load up a number of programs. A few of these sound beachy and possible, but what we do for sort of 90% of our surveys are general bird data surveys. So that top option, and if you click that, what it will do then, oh look, there's my house, is it will use the GPS on your phone and if you're within phone range, it will load up a map as well showing where you are. Any of those dark blue dots show places that you have done surveys before, and those concentric blue circles show your location. So if you've only just turned your location settings on, it might take your phone a while to figure out where you are and maybe move the map around. So the assumption is that you'll want to do a survey right here, right now. It's portable technology, but you don't have to. So I'm going to just use 2 fingers and navigate around the map. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and then take myself over to the beach. If you find it easier, you can use the little cog settings and bring up a satellite view instead, if that helps you navigate where you are. So these are some of my pre-existing surveys. Let's pretend I'm going to survey somewhere new. So I hold down, I hold down on the screen and it comes up with new survey point. And so I'm just going to click the record survey here button. And we're working through these tabs at the top of the screen. So the first one was location. Now we're on details. Then it's going to go to sightings and reviews. So it preloads some details for us, including today's date and the current time. We put in general bird data survey before, so that's there. Then there's the important ones are survey type and location name. So we need to call my location something. I think I was somewhere near, it was somewhere near Scarborough Beach. So I'm going to call it Scarborough Beach Access Track. And then I need to put in a survey type. When I click that, it gives me this nice little menu. Like I said, the 20-minute 2 hectare area searches or the 500 metre area searches are the common ones. I'll just say click 500 metre area search for this one because I want to show you something. And so number of observers, how many of us are there in the room? I think there's about 14 at the moment. So let's set that at 14 observers, all on our merry way to the beach. And next we click to start our survey, we click record sightings. It brings up this page here. Of course, our survey list starts blank. We click this grey box at the top that says search by species name. As soon as we click that, it will load up a list of the 30 most common species that are found nearby. So obviously we're not at the beach at the moment. I must be close to a wetland because I've got some ducky customers at the top of my list. So you can either scroll through this list. Let me get rid of that all right, we'll keep using that, that's fine. You can either scroll through this list to find the bird that you're looking for, if it's a really common one, but it's just as quick to type. So let's say I saw silver eyes. So I'm going to start typing, and you can see the species start to come in as I start to narrow down as I start typing. So I've just typed 3 letters and I've already got to the bird that I'm after. I can put that in. Click save, and then it's on my list. So I can keep walking around the habitat. I can add birds that I see. Let's say if I think that I see something a little bit unusual, maybe I think I see an orange-bellied parrot. I'm definitely sure they like coastal vegetation, and I saw one, but I see that all the birds that I go to type in are now turning up, instead of being written in blue, they're written in red. And when I click one, when I click on orange-bellied parrot, it comes up to say it's out of range. So it's asking me to take a closer look. So I can either go, oh, no, that definitely wasn't an orange-bellied parrot. It was a rock parrot instead. Or I can say, no, I'm sure. If I do say I'm sure, I need to provide some extra notes. So there's a capacity to add photos to this as well. So and you can add them later on the web portal, but you have to add notes. So make them as helpful as possible. Say clearly seen. You mention some of the identifying features that you use. Say that you're familiar with the species, you've seen them there before. Have a photograph, any of that sort of thing, and you can put them in, or so let's just put clearly seen. Oh gosh, all right, and then we go back to the and then we hit save. If we think it's a mistake, we can hit cancel. We'll add it because I'm a cowboy. So then we add we keep walking around the habitat, we add the other species that we see. Once it's already on the list, you can use these little plus and minuses just to add or subtract individuals from your list. But you keep on going until you've walked around the survey site. Up in the top right here, you'll see this little timer's counting. It's telling us how long we've been doing the survey for. So we wander around the habitat, then we go to click review. it will take the timer, the time that's displayed on the screen, and make that our survey time. And it's telling me that I put in that dodgy orange-bellied parrot. But it gives me the opportunity to have a look through all the details that I've put in, make sure they're correct, and then I just hit submit survey and I'm done. This one I am actually just going to hit the back button, and I'm actually going to delete this survey and not submit my orange-bellied parrot sighting. All right. So, and it's really easy. You can, it loads up really quickly. It works in remote areas. You don't need to be within phone range for the Birdata surveys to work, because it uses your phone's inbuilt GPS. It might not display the map correctly, but the GPS points will still be accurate. So I will just quickly bring up this screen here. Okay, I had a few. This was my backup in case it didn't work. All right, so for those of you who are saying, how can you brush up on your bird skills? You're like, oh, that seemed a little bit intense, Tegan. I don't know if I'm up to doing all of that. Give it a shot. The best way to learn about your birds is to go out there and look at them. Equipment definitely helps, like getting hold of a good pair of binoculars will really improve your enjoyment of the birds. Like being able to see them makes all the difference, and see them in really nice detail. Take a friend and learn together. There's lots of, because bird watching and people, there's a community around it. There's lots of opportunities to join local bird walks and talk to other people about what you've seen, about good spots. It seems like a sort of an individual or a lonely activity, but there's really a lovely community around bird watching, and it's really one of the, it's not like fishing where people are worried about other fishermen going to their secret spot and nabbing all their fish. Bird watchers don't mind if everybody goes to the same spot and enjoys the same birds. It's part of the joy of it all. So make use of that knowledge that's in the community. We'll also be putting out a new brochure soon together with Perth NRM, looking at birds of Perth's coastal reserves. So that should give a nice little, as well as highlighting some of the lovely coastal reserves we have in the Perth area, should highlight some of the species we're most likely to see there. Otherwise, yeah, that's it from me. That's the Birdata website address. That's my email address if you have any questions later on, but I'm sure there are some questions in the Q&A thing now. So thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tegan.
Actually, I'll leave that screen up just so it has my details in case anybody wants to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wants to copy it. Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm one of those people that I've downloaded the app, but then I haven't used it much since. So that demonstration was really helpful. And I saw in some of the chat, someone's just downloaded it then.
Yay, excellent.
While we've got some questions coming up on the Q&A, I have one to start with, or a couple. You've said about a couple of types of surveys that we can do. Is it worth doing the incidental survey if we see something that we don't normally see? So the one-off?
Yeah, definitely. So I do have a sneaky little slide that I will bring up. This one here. So this is the one that I usually bring up when people say, what survey should I use? And so these dark blue ones are all ones that appear in that drop-down list when you go to enter a survey in Birdata. And usually it comes down to what your intention is. If you see something that is really neat and worth recording, but you hadn't intended to go out and birdwatch at all, then definitely put it in as an incidental. I put incidental recordings of lots of birds of prey that I see around the city when I'm heading out and about. Or if I see something unusual, maybe I see a cuckoo at an odd time of year or something like that, all of those go in as incidentals. But otherwise it comes to sort of how much attention how much bird watching is the focus of what you're doing, and how much ground you're covering as well. So yeah, I just use that little flow chart to work. I suggest people use that little flow chart to work through. I find that quite helpful.
Perfect. Another thing I noticed is You have done 1,963 surveys.
Yes.
How long has that taken you?
Oh, so keep in mind, I work for BirdLife, so some of those are work surveys. But the app came out in 2016, so in September 2016, and I think I put in some. It's one of the nice things about Birdata is you can go back and look at like road trips that you've been on and birds that you've seen elsewhere. When you go to record a survey, it assumes you want to do one right here, right now, but you can backdate them and do like ones from old trips. If you've got any old sort of bird sightings or notebooks that are sitting around with bird observations written in them, you can if you think you can fill out all those categories that Birdata asks, we'd love to see them in there. But most of those probably come from about 3 years worth of bird watching, I reckon.
Brilliant. All right, we do have a couple of questions. One of them was, did you say you could do all 3 of the light blue surveys through the app? So I think
the dark blue, so there's 6 dark blue ones, the incidental, bird list, the fixed route search, and then the 2 hectare, 20 minute, 500 metre and the 5 kilometre area search are the 6 ones you can do.
And all through the app?
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. And we just spoke about the pamphlet then.
Yes.
Where will we be able to get a hold of that new brochure when it comes out?
That's an excellent question. I'm hoping within about a month we'll be able to, depending on, I'm not quite sure what the deal is with printers at the moment. I'm sure they're all still they should all be getting back to business and operating as normally. So yeah, hopefully we can at least get a digital version out within the next month. And within the next month, I think, is when we're hoping to get some of the BirdLife excursions back up and running as well. So the local BirdLife branch, they in non-COVID times, they're doing 3 bird walks a week, and usually 2.5 of them are in the Perth area. So there's a great opportunity to, even if there's not a piece of paper to look at, to go out and get some like hands-on experience in some of our lovely reserves.
Absolutely. And just to add on to that answer, we'll be able to provide a lot of the coast care groups with that brochure so that you can have them. BirdLife will have some at their office, and of course, as Tegan said, we'll be putting it online as well. So it's a very open resource to be used. Yeah. Well, there's still time to ask some questions, so please type away if you have some. But Tegan,
yes,
why is it important for the general community to get involved in citizen science?
So Australia is this massive continent, and all of our, unfortunately, our population is really quite concentrated. So there are lots of amazing spots in the country that people visit on and off, but not very frequently. To try and collect data from those areas is really, really important. Some of when you start getting large volumes of data, and you can tell some really fantastic things about what's going on. I've seen some beautiful maps from North America. So a lot of the North American birds migrate, and they're able to show the migration of each of the species just using citizen science data. So using how people see them. It's almost like these sort of waves of birds that like move with the seasons. It's magic. But yeah, we're such a low density country, and we have such amazing bird life that's worth sort of keeping an eye out for.
Absolutely. And just thinking about the map that you put on about the white-winged fairy-wren, I actually have had some incidental reports from volunteers recently saying they've seen it at Leighton Beach. So throughout the year, it's been coming down through Cottesloe, and I think we've actually had a sighting at Leighton Beach. So adding that to the Birdata app would be quite important.
It most certainly would, yeah. Yeah, the white-winged fairy-wrens, they can't fly very far. So usually they don't disperse big distances. Usually the family group will live in a territory year round, and when they have to disperse from that, usually they just go into the next available space. So if there's a blank area that has no fairy wrens in it, they'll settle it like one territory at a time. So it can be a slow process.
Brilliant. Do you know which coastal plants the white-winged fairy wrens get their seeds from?
So most of our fairy-wrens are insectivorous. They do take a little bit of, they will take some seed, or mostly they will take some fruit and seed just to supplement their diet, but they're mostly insect eaters. So most of the pictures that I put up and the birds that I spoke about, I didn't mention, apart from the singing honeyeater that eats mostly insects, there were very few nectar-feeding birds. That's because a lot of our coastal plants, the nectar that they provide and the way that flowers are designed, they attract more insects than not. So instead of attracting nectar-feeding birds, they tend to attract the birds that feed on the insects that feed on the nectar.
Brilliant. And I know that we've done some surveys of invertebrates or insects,
Yep.
and the diversity of insects in the coastal reserves is incredible as well.
Yeah, it certainly would be.
Brilliant. So thank you so much. I don't think we've got any more questions coming up, but we do have some more time if there are some last minute ones. But a big thank you to you, Tegan, for your wonderful presentation. And I can see your passion coming through. You've already made me, I'm going to grab my phone and get out there next week. And I hope everyone else has found this workshop of great value. We certainly can't wait to get out and conduct more surveys with community groups.
Excellent. And yeah, if anybody has any questions down the track or like just annoying bird ID puzzles, I love a bird ID puzzle. Send them in. I want to hear them.
Nice.
But it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody.
No worries. There is one more question just on the chat. Can a coast care group register or record their info on Birdata as a group rather than an individual?
Yeah, you most certainly can. So it's best to send in an email rather than to use the login form, because the form will still ask you to put in an email address and a first name and a last name and all of those sorts of things. But if you shoot an email to birdata@birdlife.org.au and say, I'd like to set up a group login, my name's this, you can even pick your login name and your password then and there, and they'll set it, as long as nobody else has the same username, they'll set it up. And that's a really good way. So that means that that lots of people can have the same login and all the information goes to the same pool, so the coast care group can access all of it together. It's a neat way to go.
Perfect. So as I mentioned before, we will be uploading this recorded workshop to our website within about 7 days, along with the video, good quality video, and keep an eye out for that Perth Coastal Reserves and Birds pamphlet, which BirdLife Australia are helping us to create. So thanks again. Thank you, Tegan. Enjoy your day.
I will.
Be sure to contact us and Tegan with any questions that you have. Check out our website, www.perthnrm.com, or our Facebook page for any upcoming events, and you'll see them there. Happy birding, everyone.
Happy birding, everyone.